Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing fantastic. We're continuing our reading of Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Pretty cool guy, pretty nerdy, very world famous. I always recommend reading his works for yourself instead of watching a YouTube video where they don't actually go into the text, but rather give you their opinion. And always remember, don't listen to anyone talk about Nietzsche if they have not read his works themselves. Too many people will talk about an individual, but they haven't actually read their works, and then they say, oh yeah, I read it, and then maybe read like 2 or 3 pages, right? And then you're not an expert at that point. You haven't done the work. You have no authority to speak. So what I like to do is dig in, and philosophy is one of my favorite subjects. I really do miss my fellow philosophers who I used to have in the college. They were great people. One of my favorite teachers is my philosophy teacher, who is a atheist and a nihilist. He's so funny. Hopefully one day he gets guided to Islam, but he was a great teacher. Very great teacher. Now, let's begin. We're continuing on the passage that says, on the tree, on the mountainside. Zarathustra's eye had noted that a youth avoided him, and one evening as he walked alone through the mountains surrounding the town, which is called the Motley Cow, behold, on his walk he found this youth as he sat leaning against a tree, looking wearily into the valley. Zarathustra gripped the tree under which the youth was sitting and spoke thus: if I wanted to shake this tree with my hands, I should not be able to do it. But the wind, which we do not see, tortures and bends it in whatever direction it pleases. It is by this invisible hands that we are bent in the tortured worst. Now this is a very interesting example. Invisible hands, his physical hands, and then the wind, right? It is quite fascinating how the wind does have such a sway upon the trees. But us as humans, we'd have to climb up the trunk of the tree, try to shake it, but we could only do it for so long because we're limited. And even the way we shake the tree, it's not as strong as what the wind can do, right? If you've ever seen the wind totally uproot a tree during a storm. Here, he's kind of comparing that to how there's unseen forces that torture and bend us in directions that we may not be pleased with. It's a very unique comparison and metaphor, analogy. Then the youth got up in consternation and said, I hear Zarathustra, and just now I was thinking of him. Zarathustra replied, why should that frighten you? But it is with man as it is with the tree. The more he aspires to the height and light, the more strongly do his roots strive earthward, downward, into the dark deep, into evil. Now this is interesting. Okay, so the more he aspires to the height and light, the more strongly do his roots strive earthward, downward, into the dark, the deep, into evil. Okay, this is a very unique statement here. You could go in so many directions with this. As you go higher in life and you try to refine yourself, the more temptations and things that come your way that try to knock you off. As a Muslim, I would say, with increased greatness comes increased resistance. And if you want a firm footing, you can only get that firmness, that muscular fortitude, through pressure. And the greater you are, the more pressure you need, the more pushback you need. In order to do that, you also have to know what is beneath you, what horrors lie beyond, so that you know how to keep going upward. But there's a darker side that some say, to know true goodness, you must know true evil. And you must study the evil to know what is good. And you have to know the extreme sides of the coin. And so this leads some to think you have to participate in both in order to have a more formalized character. Others say it is simply enough to know that capacity of evil exists and to then still keep striving upward, but to understand that the higher you go, the more firm-footed and deep-rooted you need to be, because a tree can only grow as tall as its roots will allow it to. It's really a quite fascinating way to look at it. Yes, into evil, cried the youth. How is it possible that you discover my soul? Zarathustra smiled and said, some souls one will never discover, unless one invents them first. One invents them first. That is witty. So, when people say, I've reinvented myself, I'm just this, and that. A lot of hippie liberals say that when they go on some type of Burning Man retreat or whatever. And others would say, I've reformed myself and cultivated and shaped myself, which has led to a new invented soul. So there's many ways you could go about looking at that statement. Yes, into evil, the youth cried once more. You have spoken the truth, Zarathustra. I no longer trust myself since I aspire to the height. And nobody trusts me anymore. How did this happen? I changed too fast. My today refutes my yesterday. Now this is quite interesting right here. I've had that experience. You change too fast. Your today refutes your yesterday. We could call this in development, because sometimes the truth can just shock you in the moment. And that's happened to me before, where somebody exposed Joe Rogan to be this drug-pushing, bisexual, porn addict, creep, gatekeeping person. And once I learned that information through multiple presentations this person did with clips about about Rogan's character, I could not unsee what I saw, and I turned away, unsubscribed, and now I see Rogan as a deviant element of the shaitan. So that change refuted my yesterday. Because when someone can present to you something where there's so much shocking evidence where you're like, oh, okay, I agree with that, and you change. But sometimes it can be the opposite. Where I went like vegan for 2 years, was really into it, realized it's not actually healthy, not sustainable, and then I switched back to just eating organic, pasture-raised, humane certified, non-GMO beef. So that refuted my yesterday. And it was a quick change because I saw the empirical evidence that it wasn't working. So it was a change. So I understand people who can go too fast, too quick. But I'm also concerned with how some people cannot be genuine. They can grift, right? There's genuine changing of the mind, and then there's disingenuous changing of the mind. I often skip steps when I climb. No step forgives me that. When I am at the top, I always find myself alone. Nobody speaks to me. The frost of loneliness makes me shiver. Now this is very deep. So, skipping steps when you climb. As you excel through life, you're trying to get to the light, to the heights. There are certain... Habanero, can you stop humming? There are steps you can skip, okay? And some people will think, well, you can't skip. Sometimes you can. Depends on what it is, right? But he covers more distance. But he also says, no steps forgives me that. So you can skip something and then look back and say, I needed that. There aren't shortcuts. You gotta go methodologically, even if it takes you more time. which I find to be quite fascinating. Now, when he says, I find himself alone, and that nobody speaks to me. Yes, the path to climb the heights gets narrower and narrower and narrower, whereas the baser you are, some could argue that you have a wider net of debauchery community because that's the higher groups of people who... Okay, how do I put this? Alright. The nerds are a couple, whereas those who want to use drugs, fornicate, party, gamble, they're more in number. So you go to a bar of hedonists, there's going to be a bunch of people there. You're not alone. But if you went to like a book club meeting, might be 5 people there. And out of that 5, you may have one person who you connect with, if any. So the more noble path that you aspire to, it can be a lonely road that makes you shiver. This is very insightful. What do I want up high? My contempt and my longing grow at the same time. Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. Your contempt and your longing grow the higher you climb. The higher I climb, the more I despise the climber. That's a paradox, is it not? What does he want up high? How ashamed I am of my climbing and stumbling. How I mock at my violent panting. How I hate the flyer. How weary I am up high. So it's interesting. I think many of us could put ourselves in this poetic position, where the higher you go, sometimes you can be like, why am I doing this? Or why are they doing that? What does he want? I wish I could do better. I wish I wouldn't make mistakes. Being highly self-critical can help motivate you, but also can be detrimental to your progress. Higher you go, you look down, like, what are they doing? They're just having fun hanging out. I'm sitting here working hard, panting. And then you look up higher, like, well, he's ahead of me. What does he know up there? So it's quite interesting the way we look at it, isn't it? How weary I am up high. You're going to get more winded. It's more work. So there's a balance here of perspective. Here the youth stopped, and Zarathustra contemplated the tree, beside which they stood, and spoke thus. This tree stands lonely here in the mountains. It grew high above man and beast. And if it wanted to speak, it would have nobody who could understand it. So high has it grown. Now it waits and waits. For what is it waiting? It dwells too near the seat of the clouds. Surely it waits for the first lightning. Now this is interesting. Lightning really burns trees and causes fires. So waiting to die, a tree, even if it could speak, because it's so above everyone else, no one would really understand it. And so, due to that loneliness, it dwells near the clouds. When people say, you have your heads in the clouds, you think to come back down to reality, they say, when you're a high thinker. They mock you for it. But if you spoke like Cardi B and were, filled with debauchery and debasing yourself, people would understand it almost sometimes more than the introvert who is a bit autistic or a bit so intelligent that they can't connect with the average Joe, that they have this sense of, no one understands me, I can't fit in. And that's why when people would make fun of me, another red pill YouTuber, he said, oh, you only have, less than, 5 female friends. But actual nerds who dedicate their time to their field and who are so niche, so hermit-like, so dedicated and steadfast, they don't have time to be social butterflies. The higher they go, the more narrow their circles become, and the more they try to spend time with people who are very similar to themselves. When you are a party goer, a social butterfly, you can float from group to group aimlessly yet swiftly and have time being the hostess, being the social butterfly. That is who you are. And people can understand you because you have adapted yourself to being a social butterfly. But not everyone who aspires to higher levels of being in their niche field can do that. A mathematician has to really dedicate hours and hours to his formulas. He doesn't have time to go to the club and waste hours upon hours and trying to fit in. And so some people will say, get your head out of the clouds, come back down to reality. But that's actually bad to tell the nerdy philosopher, mathematician, inspired person, because they need to have that vision of and having their minds outside of the beast system, outside of the base system, outside of the hedonistic system, so that we can get some more pure, truthful ideas by the permission of Allah. If everybody was just humping around like animals, shaking their butts like Cardi B, slinging drugs like Jay-Z, doing bad things, being criminals, robbing, we wouldn't have much progress. Somebody has to sit and ponder and think and give their ideas out, and those ideas will have a ripple effect, and those people who are more content with being alone occasionally will feel a sense of no one speaks to me because I'm so introverted, because my energy is so concealed and stoic, that the social butterflies, they want somebody more goofy, silly, charismatic, and whatnot, and then they have all the friends when the nerds don't have as many friends. Because the nerd is within their own mind. They're introverted. They can be extroverted when they want to be, but they feel more comfortable in their introverted manner. And so when somebody mocks someone as having their heads in the clouds, not having a lot of friends, making fun of someone's loneliness, they're not really understanding that there has to be those types in the world in order for us to have the good things we want in the world. Because they have to be obsessed and dedicated to their profession in order to get the cream of the crop, while others have a different mode and ability in life to simply exist and have fun. Not everybody wants to be a celebrity with hundreds of fake friends on the red carpet and being just someone who gets thousands of pictures taken of them. No, some people don't mind being behind the curtain, contributing heavily to the design of a very nice truck or the design of a new Wi-Fi router. They don't get their name publicized, but they have their head in their vision that's out there. So you can't make fun of those people. It's quite interesting. It is a very unique element that we have here when Zarathustra and this youth are talking to each other. And the tree example. The tree stands lonely here in the mountains. The hermit, the loner in the mountains, thinking, pondering, waiting for a first lightning. It's very quite poetic. And then when the youth says they can actually have contempt, but they also have a longing. They want to go higher, but they have contempt for those who have already gone higher, and then they get mad at their own failings. It's a very unique way of looking at achievement, looking at sacrifice, emotional control, how you have your beingness within your realm. It's really profound, the way in which he writes. And we are like that tree, in a way. Just think about the examples he gave. The more he aspires to the height and light, the more strongly do his roots strive earthward, downward into the dark, deep into evil. Your soul you have to regulate it. Don't let the roots go the wrong way. Your family roots, your financial roots. There's lots of analogies and metaphors within trees themselves. Your family tree, right? We have a lot of elements trees that bear fruit. You get it? You know a tree by the kind of fruit it produces. Oh, if it has one bad fruit on the tree, you can't chop down the whole tree. A tree that doesn't get watered much or tended to will be infested by parasites and crumble. A tree is the shade for some and a home for others, or both. Or when the tree comes crashing down, it smashes the house along with it. There's just so many ways you can look at it. I really enjoyed this section. I hope you did too. Remember the invisible hands he spoke about, and how they bend the trees but also us. And that invisible hand is our mind and our consciousness as well. Also the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because your own mind, it's like an invisible hand that can torture you as the wind tortures the tree. Very fascinating. Hope you have a good day.